Hello, everyone. So sorry about that, the little delay, but our panelists are now all ready. So please welcome everyone on board for the panel on Oracle use in stablecoins and their challenges. One thing though, we did announce that Phil Kelly would be moderating, but he is unwell. But Nadim from Mental Labs has very kindly agreed to jump in at the last minute. So yeah, please welcome our panelists and moderator on stage.
Yeah, hello everyone. As Parina said, I'm Nadim. I'm part of Mentor Labs. We are on Cello and we have been building stables since 2020, also our own Oracle, so there is some knowledge. But yeah, let's first introduce the people on the panel. Maybe you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Jacob. I'm the founder of Redstone, and we are an Oracle providing data on various assets, not only the price data, and we are quite flexible, like how can you consume assets? Could be like pool model, on demand, classic model, etc.
Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor from Reserve. Reserve is an open platform for creating stablecoins, and we're a consumer of oracles.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melina. I lead communications for HyperOracle. We're a ZK Oracle network for mainly off-chain computation.
I'm Chris Hermida. I'm one of the co-founders of Switchboard. We're a customizable Oracle network on a number of different chains. And before then, I actually used to work at Circle, so relevant and very familiar with stablecoins.
And hello everyone, I'm Mark from the Aave Chain Initiative. We are the main Aave DAO delegate platform, and we are actually the clients of the Oracle solution with the Aave protocol. We are deployed in 7 different networks, working historically with Chainlink, but also expanding to other Oracle solutions, like very recently Redstone produced a price feed for Go, our new stablecoin, and I think that's part of the topics today.
Yeah, maybe to start, we could touch a bit on the different stablecoin setups and maybe the different Oracle setups, how they are used in relation to each other. Who wants to pick it up?
I can pick it up if you want. So obviously, and I think you can add to that, there's like decentralized, algorithmic, and over-collateralized CDB-based stablecoins. So Go, for example, DAI, for example, are over-collateralized CDB-based stablecoins. So when you produce a price feed on those assets, what you want to track is the secondary liquidity most of the time. So all liquid is your asset on Curve, on Balancer, on Stable Swap. When you have like centralized stablecoins, it's actually very interesting for a liquidity protocol to ask yourself the question, or should you define the value of the stablecoin, because you have a primary and a secondary market. So if I have $1,000 and an account at Circle, I can send a $1,000 wire transfer and get almost 1,000 USDC, because obviously there's a small mint and burn fee. And that's my primary market price of USDC, which is very close to $1. Should I care about the secondary market if I have those conditions?
Yeah, I like to separate them between stablecoins backed by real-world assets. USDCs obviously and USDT are sort of the biggest ones, but also to an extent, right, Maker is moving in that direction, and many others, and non-RWA backed ones, whether that's Go with Aave and many others.
But that's where like the line get blurry, because there's many real-world assets behind DAI and maybe Go in the future. So what's completely on-chain asset and what's completely off-chain asset? I think the lines are getting blurrier and blurrier in the ecosystem.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is that pretty much every stablecoin, I think I can say every stablecoin, though I'm welcome to find counterexamples here, every stablecoin that is built on-chain off of other on-chain pieces does need an oracle, right? Even Rye or Liquidity, as you mentioned, still uses the ETHUSD oracle in order to know when to do liquidations and so on. So, you know, the only stablecoins that are immune from this are the off-chain stablecoins, like you discussed, USDC, USDT.
Yeah, I think that's a funny comment, because like there's this race for building a decentralized stablecoin, but if you look at it, all fiat referencing stables, they need an oracle, and the input is always a centralized price. It comes from a place that is able to do fiat price making. So
if I may follow on Mark's question, this was, I think, crucial for any Oracle provider. Like, why do we exist? If, for example, with Circle, you got this guarantee that you can redeem this almost $1. But still, in our view, let's say the mission for Oracle is just to satisfy the needs of a protocol. So for a product like Aave, the most important question is whether they will be able to liquidate the collateral. So that's the main function for the Oracle price. So sourcing the price on-chain when you can quickly liquidate the collateral seems to be, let's say, the most useful price discovery mechanism for the lending protocols. Obviously, it may work different for some kind of, like, say, perpetuals, options, etc. But we always need to have in mind, let's say, who is our customer and what and how the price will be used for.
yeah, it's also an interesting point. I had a discussion yesterday with the guy from Vega Protocol. They are building a derivatives market, and we were chatting about oracles. And he had an interesting take on oracles, because we were chatting about, you're building an oracle, you're averaging, you're taking a median maybe. And he said, I mean, to him, coming from a derivatives side, it's not about this average. Basically, you're defining a derivative, and you say this is a derivative based on the price coming from Binance. So you're much more specific, and I think, like, in our general Oracle setup, we are forgetting about this. We are creating some average, some median, hoping to get some robustness. But I think in the financial world, people are much more specific about what they actually mean if they're talking about a price.
Yeah, so I think this is a great point, and we actually already have price ranges today. I think people don't realize this. Chainlink, largest Oracle provider, obviously comes with this Oracle tolerance per feed, right? So for WBTC, that might be plus or minus 2%. For USDC, that might be plus or minus 0.25%. And people don't really think about what this means, right? What this means is they may have put the entry in the Oracle sometime in the past, some time has passed, and there's been some price movement, and now the price is, 15 bips different rather than the 25. They'll be required to update the Oracle, right? So what does this mean? It means the actual price out there is different than what you see in the Oracle, but not by enough that it's worth updating the Oracle. So something interesting that Reserve has done that I haven't seen anyone else do is to actually interpret the Oracle values in terms of these ranges. So we sort of take the mean provided by Chainlink, subtract the Oracle tolerance, add the Oracle tolerance, come with our own low and high estimates for the asset. And then we do all our math in terms of these ranges, right? So it's like if you're multiplying two values together, or let's say you are projecting a swap of asset A for asset B. Sort of the best case is that you sell asset A at the high price and buy asset B at the low price, but you also account for the case where you sell asset A at the low price and buy asset B at the high price. And this sort of gives you a level of robustness that you could extend if people did provide low and high estimates directly.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for example, what we are doing is if we feel that there is too much uncertainty, if the range is too high, like, we are suspending services, whether it's like entirely. What we don't have right now is, like, you could think about allowing redemption or only allowing issuance depending on how the price is moving, I think.
I think that's part of the next frontier for DeFi, to have like actual circuit breakers. That's something we are actively discussing, and because we are a decentralized protocol, we do that in the open. So if you are interested in the topic, you can go to governance.aave.com and check the discussion about like the circuit breakers and the kill switch on Aave to basically decide what you do as a liquidity protocol if volatility is outside the bounds, or the Oracle the price feed output is outside of what is expected. And for now, the answer, and obviously it's not definitive, we are decentralized, so there's going to be a vote, but it range between we stop new position, so anybody can withdraw from Aave, repay their position, but nobody can deposit more and borrow more on this specific asset, to actually move the liquidation threshold up and down to limit the potential downside of a shortfall event. And that's something that is completely underutilized in DeFi, but is completely normal in traditional finance. Like in traditional financial market, when a stock price move of 25% intraday, usually the broker will say, maybe something wrong is happening, and maybe we should take a step back, hit the pause button, and assess what is going on right now.
Yeah, just to add on that, a lot of it is balancing sort of the user experience, right, of where you don't want a user inadvertently liquidated on, say, a big move versus protocol solvency where, okay, let's say there is a horrible hack somewhere, right, there should be liquidations triggered on that, assuming that, say, collateral isn't where it should be.
And it's all about balance, and sorry. It's all about balance because as a protocol also, you want to protect your users, but you never know the future, obviously. And for example, on liquid staking token, it's actually even more visible than on centralized stablecoin is that you have a primary market and you have a good vision of a primary market. So unless Lido gets hacked, if the ST ETH value that is supposed to be 1 ETH to 1 ST ETH is at 92 cents on curve for any kind of reason, as a protocol, you may have excess debt. So on paper, some positions are underwater, but you have high confidence if you know all Lido works and all redemption work and all Sin Shanghai Ethereum work itself, that probably in 3 days, all your position will be above a 1 L factor. So what do you do as a protocol? Do you accept temporary underwater position and excess debt at the risk that maybe you're wrong and in 3 days the situation will be worse because there's an actual problem and your excess debt become bad debt that is actually like bad things for the protocol and the users? Or do you say, no, we just hit the pause button, we don't liquidate wrongfully the users, and we let things happen?
Yeah, I have a real world story to share about this. So one of the R tokens in the reserve protocol is backed by USDC during March of this year, USDC depegged. There's automatic logic built in the smart contract to detect when a token has depegged and actually select emergency backup collateral to sell the broken token for. The protocol ended up selling USDC for 95.5 cents. And in fact, looking back, we can say, well, that resulted in a loss, right? Because USDC did regain its peg, and if the protocol hadn't sold, then it would have been better off. But I think the thing you said about uncertainty is really key. You can't really do this hindsight bias thing where you look back and say, well, it was stupid to sell it at that time because, who knows? Maybe the Fed would have decided to act differently. Maybe there was a backing in other banks other than SVB that we didn't know about, such that USDC maybe could have taken a 20, 30% haircut. So yeah, it's really hard. You have to make decisions given the information you have at the time, and it's all about coming up with good rules that over time, as you replay over and over, you're fairly sure that your protocol won't get wiped out, right?
Yeah, and one thing that I think all of this is really bringing up is the distinction between sort of, let's call it mark price, right? What is the price in the market? And sort of fair value price, right? What should this be worth? And those are really two different problems, and everybody takes a different approach to it. But I think that recognition is it's sort of, there are two Oracle prices, if you will, right? One is sort of what is the risk model, right? What should this be worth? And then the other one of what is this worth based off the last market price or based off what we're seeing across a number of different markets.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe if I may also follow, there was a super interesting point about circuit breakers, like who can actually control this circuit breaker? Like, we as an Oracle provider, we do not want to have this large red button and then suddenly decide whether we should stop providing a price or not, because it's probably not up to us. There are different protocols, different risk models. Also, it was super interesting to observe that in the real life scenario when the Luna crashed. So obviously the main price feed was stopped at a certain point, and it was stopped after people noticed on chain that there been malicious usage when some hackers were just deploying tons of Luna just to extract value through loans. But also after the price feed was stopped, there was another collateral because some of the lending protocols got the trap liquidity that couldn't liquidate it out. So having some kind of flexibility when an oracle can signal that there is something wrong with the price, as Nadim, you mentioned, some kind of a reliability score, some kind of extreme volatility, conditions and allowing protocols to, for example, stop the minting activity, but keep the liquidation or redemption activity would be like super helpful. We give the power back to the people who know most about how the protocol works.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's an interesting point about oracles. I think, like being working on a stable, there is this value that comes from the oracle relayers, and there is this like consensus that is built about the price. And because all of the relayers agree on the price, we think, yeah, this price is right. But there's something funny. I mean, these relayers. It's a package of software. All of the relayers are running the same. They're pulling the same API. They come to the same conclusion. And if the math behind this package is able to calculate a value, whether it's an average or a median, they will all provide this value and they will come to a consensus. But it doesn't mean that this value has truth. So I think this is why I believe, like working for a stable protocol, we need like a distinction where, or a second measure which tells us whether we can trust this value or not.
Yeah, maybe I can speak something about that. So what we're working on right now, we don't really have that fully developed yet. It's basically a way to verify the TLS signatures. So basically that would allow us, it's a little bit what Chainlink is also doing with Deco or TLS Notary, which basically helps you to verify well, the data that you're pulling from the API, and then you have a zero knowledge proof of that data. And then you can basically instantly say, boom, either the data is correct or it's not correct. So you actually wouldn't even need like several Oracle nodes. One node pulling the data would be more than enough already.
Yeah, I love that design. What I'd really like to see, and I think people have talked about this for a while, is if you imagine every exchange API publishes a public key that it is using to sign some data in the background. It updates the public key on chain, as it, obviously you have to protect the private key off chain the right way. But if you imagine you have this signed data from every single exchange API, you could have someone do a zero knowledge proof to prove that, all these values average out to X, they have a standard deviation of Y, and they're all signed by all the public keys that exist in all these smart contracts on chain. That's a really high level of certainty.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, we're a few years away from it, but to me, that's sort of the end state, right, of all of crypto is sort of more economic activity moves on chain, right? People publish things directly there, and then you can read it and cryptographically prove that, okay, this source is not. But for the intermediate, I think every oracle relies on some form of an honest majority or a trusted party. Not that people care, right? Sort of the market's already spoken that, we agree with this mechanism. But it'll be interesting to see if we do move in the future to that model. Beyond just exchanges, right? Just sort of every data provider, every sort of API source.
I think there's in the case of stablecoin and real world asset, there's something that I have not seen yet in the market, but we are more and more like our usage of people like just giving, especially MakerDAO, creating DAI out of thin air to create with credit line to third-party entity in the mid space and do a carry trade. Basically, they buy very high quality bonds, commercial papers like corporate loans and things like that. I would love an Oracle because in Europe, I don't know for the US, but in Europe we have like this open API standard where you can actually transmit data from the banking world and to have like zero knowledge proof that prove instantly every single day that there's actual money on a bank account, there's actual financial asset on a bank account, and then the Oracle prove that, and it's a proof of reserve. And if for some reason the money is not there on the bank account, instantly the credit line is removed. If we have that, that would be much more interesting and decentralized way to do real-world asset collaterals for stablecoins.
Yeah, so I think the cool thing about the TLS signatures is that you don't even need the API anymore. You can just if you can just log into the website by yourself and you have access to the data on that page, then you can just verify the data instantly with a ZKP. So
that would be so cool. Let's do that.
That's the Plaid approach, the scraping approach. Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really cool is Switchboard, so we pioneered that, but it relies on a trusted intermediary. And part of that was, okay, how can we make this more trustless, right? And one of the things we did was combine economic security with trusted enclaves. given that you do need some form of intermediary to trust the TLS signature that that request to the centralized API has not been tampered with. And so far, there's no real way around that. It's possible in the future that there are, but the way that I think this will play out is eventually you'll have, like we mentioned earlier, these sites, these API providers, cryptographically posting their data or in some provable way, period.
That would put a lot of people in the big four are on job employment, and I think that's a good thing. Let's fire half of those dudes at KPMG or whatever.
I mean, there's one interesting thing with real-world assets. I mean, with oracles in general. I mean, we used to talk, about oracles for assets that usually have a good API. So this is why we have so many crypto oracles. Yes, you can probably onboard banking APIs, but I think already with FX data is getting more complicated because maybe some of you are familiar with the FX market. I mean, it's a very decentralized market. There's not one exchange that has an API and gives you the data. So there are different FX brokers. They all have their quotes, so bid and ask, and they have volumes. And it's actually quite complicated to pull in all these data. I mean, I just recently tried to do this for an African currency, and it has two sides. So which providers do I pick? Do I get an API? Maybe I have to do KYC. I have to pay for it. If I take a tier 1 provider, it's quite a lot of money. So there are a lot of questions around these APIs. So how can I integrate these assets? And I think right now we are only seeing oracles for APIs that are easy to access. But I think if we want to scale stables, and there's this idea of adding other currencies than USD, I think we will be running into this problem. And I'm curious how oracles are trying to solve for this.
So a lot of oracles already support different APIs. I mean, one thing that we did at Switchboard was we started from the ground up, where we want from day one to allow people to customize their APIs and use any sort of public or private API for their specific need. I think it's more market demand, right? Where the majority of DeFi is, for better or for worse, currently still focused on the financial aspects. Therefore, the vast majority are financial APIs. Maybe in the future, we'll see a lot more esoteric sort of usage. But I think at the moment, what you're seeing isn't necessarily a technical issue. It's more just a market demand issue.
Yeah, for sure. But still, if you wanted to bring in the FX providers, you will have to contact all. That's what I'm doing right now. What I've been doing. It's it's a work that I think with most of the APIs right now, we don't have. For FX, the data is available. It's just a very different process of gathering the data. And regarding real-world assets, I think there's another interesting topic, which is some of these assets that might be interesting to turn into real-world assets and to turn into collateral for stables. They don't have APIs either. It's more like there is a claim that you are an owner. We were just talking about this, like some Brazilian debt from the government. It's written somewhere in a registry. And so do you think it's the responsibility of the oracles to make this kind of information available to the blockchain, which in this case would probably require a set of lawyers verifying that this claim is actually true, and these lawyers basically putting the information on-chain that this off-chain claim that is in a registry somewhere in a court is true? Do you see some, okay, it won't happen this year, next year, it's for the future, but could you see a future where this kind of information is brought on-chain and verified in such a hybrid way?
I think it would be of high interest, especially for issuers like MakerDAO and probably Aave at some point, to have this kind of off-chain verification that can have on-chain consequence. Because on our approach that is based on multiple Go facilitators, it makes sense to have those kind of specific special purpose Go facilitators. So yes, I think there's going to be demand, and that's a whole untapped market in DeFi for now.
Yeah, I would maybe say it depends, of course, on like the format the data comes in. If we're talking like physical documents, it's going to be really tough. But if there is like an official website from the notary or like from the government or whatever, then you could also just easily verify that data once again with this TLS signature, and then you could also pull that data on chain as well. So that would be one way of going about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one thing that I'm thinking about. I mean, I know a bit about Redstone's architecture, and I mean, they're using a third data availability layer where they are kind of storing their data. And okay, I mean, I'm not working on an Oracle protocol, but I'm imagining there could be a way where you are like digitalizing the contract, the physical contract, save it on the data layer, and then have basically someone verifying this digital version of the contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So we integrated with the Arweave chain. So all of the feeds that we collect, regardless whether they're from on-chain, off-chain exchanges, aggregators, have been persisted there. It's like a public domain. I think it's really important to actually assess the reputation of data providers. So you can look back in history, see all of the readings from, let's say, last year, to see whether the data provider was actually up to a standard, what he promised to deliver. That's a very good question, whether the TradFi or the legal documents will be put on chain automatically. So I'd love to see it happen. Honestly, like from my experience working with lawyers, sometimes we couldn't teach them how to use the Google Docs. So I think there's like a heavy lifting needs to be done before they can push data on chain. But yeah, so what we do also around it, so we work with one protocol. When they have published the balances of their, let's say, assets allocation every day. What's interesting what happened in between. So the even traditional assets, they are slightly volatile. And like the treasury bonds, ETF, etc., they can diverge within a day for something like a 20 BPS. Sometimes it's important if it's like a stable coin. So what we do is this hybrid model. When we get like a notarized or audited version, like what's the balance sheet, but we also match it with the real-time pricing of the price of the underlying assets, and that's something we deliver on chain. So I think step by step we can get to like a better assessment of what's the true value of this real-world asset that is backing the collateral.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering. In case of USDC, and I think we have someone who worked for Circle. Like, I mean, like from my experience, when I was trying to follow up what is the backing of USDC, you get directed to a PDF from I don't know Deloitte or PwC who has been auditing. I mean, I don't know. Is there any other layer of transparency that I'm not aware of that I could follow up if I want to understand what's behind?
So I can't comment on Circle, obviously, given that. But what I would say is that, to Mark's point, of open APIs and updating real-time access, that's sort of the dream that I think everybody wants to move to. But there's a variety of technical and just sort of business operation reasons why that isn't the case currently. What I would say is that I think that we will be there within the next handful of years. In terms of this stuff. And when you think about sort of what crypto enables, right? You sort of have the real-time balance sheet, real-time income statement of every single sort of entity out there, right? If you do move everything on chain, you do have full activity there. And to me, that's sort of the end state, end goal. But in the short term, no.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, of course, it's an opinion. I mean, I hope for a future where not every decision will be on chain, but I mean, some people have like different views of the future and what they want, but I like the analog human way of making decisions that are maybe not digital, and that actually I think it's worth having this challenge to move this decision on chain. I mean, you can have different opinions, of course, but yeah, but
I do have a different opinion. Not completely. I see what you mean, and there's merit to that, obviously. But I'm in DeFi because in DeFi, the rules of the game are the same for everyone. If you have $10 Aave will work for you on Optimism or Arbitrum because the transaction fee are a bit lower than an Ethereum mainnet. But if you have $1 million, it will be the same Aave, the same code base, and probably the interest rate you will pay on your position will be roughly the same. And I love that. I love the fact that it's very hard to negotiate, it's very hard to bribe a smart contract, and everybody is treated equally. And I think that's the part that we should cater to and maintain in terms of our ethos in the ecosystem, because that's the added value. Traditional finance works. It's finance for the rich, made by and for the rich, but it works. So if we are doing something differently, it should stay different.
No, I mean,
that doesn't mean we disagree, but I want
to
emphasize on that.
I think we agree a lot. I mean, I think so too. I mean, like how I would phrase it, I don't like the privileges that are given in traditional finance to specific players, and specifically intermediaries. I don't think it has to be like this. But on the other hand, I also think, and it's a bit more hidden, in crypto we are not better. Because if you look at how we design mechanisms, we are always designing our mechanism incorporating some constraints. I mean, for example, I mean, either we are considering actors that have money, have equipment, or have elite knowledge. Even proof of work, I mean, it's a funny name. I mean, this is something that only can be, like people profit from this who have equipment or who have money, like resources. So, like, and I think the reason is it's easier to define a mechanism for someone who has resources than to define a mechanism for someone who doesn't have resources. So I think this is why, like, our infrastructure and our DeFi infrastructure wants to be equitable, but in fact it's not.
Well, you know, to just expand on that, right, the market isn't equitable. You know, there is economies of scale, and there is just that implicit credit component, at least for decentralized stables, where, you know, the larger and the more successful they get, right, the more sort of implicit trust that you have in that system, whether true or not, right, and that sort of, you know, begets these sort of liquidity network effects and just overall brand and trust network effects. I don't see DeFi changing that. What, to Mark's point, though, that is special is that equal access, right, where anybody has access to that protocol. You can read it on chain, you can write on chain, you can do whatever you need to. And I think it would be really sad if we lose that in DeFi.
Yeah, this I agree with. Yeah.
And what I really like also about crypto is like reducing this information asymmetry. So leveling the playing field for, let's say, people who got like a personal connection in the financial world, got like, I don't know, privileged access to some data about what's happening with the balance sheet, and just making it publicly available to all of the public, and even to the, let's say, minority user of Aave that's got like a $10 deposit, they got access to the same information on chain like the largest LP provider. I think that's important. Also, we are biased because our business is just taking the data and putting that on chain, but I think that's an extra value in that for everyone, to democratize the access to finance.
Yeah, so we took a bit of a different route in the discussions, actually, but I mean, it's good. I mean, I wanted to get there, but I think we also wanted to talk a bit about, like, the attack vectors of the current setups, and we also wanted to talk a bit about, yeah, what you think are the largest risks right now in relation to stables, to oracles.
Yeah, so I think if people were on Twitter yesterday, they may have seen the Koenig finance hack. We haven't talked about this side of oracles very much today, but in addition to the problem of bringing off-chain information on-chain, you also have the problem of one on-chain protocol reading another on-chain protocol. Now, you might trivially think that, well, isn't the information just there? How can this go wrong? The issue yesterday came from a new Curve pool being deployed with a oracle that was somewhat untested, and this oracle had a read-only reentrancy vulnerability. Essentially what this means is that some part of the way through the execution of Curve's code, you could escape execution and an attacker could take it for a period of time, maybe interact with your protocol, in this case, Conic Finance. I actually don't know if it's finance, but Conic. And you know, when Conic goes back to look at the state of Curve, it maybe comes to an incorrect conclusion about the price of these LP tokens. And in this case, the attacker was able to get something like a 4.5x price manipulation, allowing them to redeem their L tokens that they had originally flash loaned for about 3 million in profit and walk away. We're actually very fortunate that this happened at a very small scale early. To me, this is a feature, not a bug. This is what DeFi is good for. But yeah, these attack vectors are sort of specific to Oracle's on-chain, usually having to do with TWAPs and AMMs. And the types of properties that you get there are very different than the properties that you have when you're reading information from off-chain, where the manipulation is more unbounded, right? If the 4 of 9 chain link multisig decides to update something and put any value in all the oracles, they can manipulate it 1,000x, 100,000x, whatever they want. So there's quite different types of attacks that you can expect from these different class of oracles.
To me, it's amazing. And I'm not throwing shade at Koenig because building DeFi is very hard. And we've seen that like in the first row for the past 3 and more years. So obviously not throwing shade, but it's amazing that in 2023, those kind of attacks still exist. But building DeFi is hard.
Yeah, so if I may also have a take on that. So sometimes we are talking to protocols about the price for derivatives like LP tokens, stake tokens, etc. And they're telling us the price is basically available on chain. So why do you want some money for the price feed? We look like scammers. The data is there, and we're asking money to provide it on chain. It's looks like super, I don't know, way to exploit protocols. But if you look deeper, like how the data is being fetched from the on-chain environment, there are like different ways in the way that could happen and usually happen. So for example, like a usual flash loan manipulation of a price. And obviously you can mitigate that first, like reading the price from the off-chain context, but also using some methodology to balance the price, like the moving the exponential average to reduce the vulnerability, not only for the flash loan manipulation, but also for the multi-block manipulation. So increasing the economic cost of the manipulation through the off-chain aggregation is something very valuable. So I do not believe that in the future we totally get rid of oracles, even if all of the data is available on chain. Sometimes you need to perform some extra calculation just to protect the protocols.
Yeah, maybe one other thing to add when it comes to possible vulnerabilities, which is more like the security standpoint that we're taking with HyperOracle, that we're kind of intending to replace like staking-based oracles with ZK oracles. So you can you can instantly verify the data, and in some cases for the oracles, you have an incentive to manipulate the data that you're delivering, just because maybe the stake you put down is the equivalent to say 10K or something like this, but maybe through the manipulation you could gain 1 million. So you're really incentivized to actually deliver the wrong data, whereas in the ZK model you could then say, well, we can verify that the data is actually correct. So I think that's another way of looking at it, and I think like that we're also not only focusing on the off-chain to on-chain, but also on-chain to off-chain, and then also off-chain computation back to on-chain. And I think that kind of, is a different way of looking at it, basically. And I hope that, or I think it might really impact how the Oracle landscape is going to look like in the coming years as well.
The thing I was going to add is just expanding on Jacob's point. I think every protocol is going to build risk modules. Many already have, but in the future they will, around the Oracle components and incorporating sort of logic around that to prevent this. And the other thing is just the biggest attacks on these sort of protocols have really in practice been price manipulation, and not even attacking sort of the Oracle integrity, if you will, right? Not the delivery mechanism, but rather the underlying sources. And that's not so much a relayer problem, right, in terms of data integrity, right? The oracles in every case pretty much have relayed data as specified by those sources, as much as just creating more resilient risk mechanisms around that and incorporating that in the design.
So this is a pretty different direction, but something that I think stablecoin protocols, and not even just stablecoin protocols, this is general to any DeFi protocol that's using an oracle. As I said earlier, there are no stablecoin protocols on chain that don't have an oracle, right? But that doesn't mean that they all equally rely on oracles. You can actually, so a pattern that is currently the case, I think is bad and we should move away from, is using the USD oracle value of some asset in order to determine the issuance and redemption costs in some DeFi protocol. This is what Conic was doing and led to the issue yesterday. But there are very different sort of lines that you can draw in the sand for where you want to rely on oracles. It can be that your issuance redemption mechanisms are not a function of USD prices at all. Instead, you can sort of corner the reliance on oracles so that it's only for one particular function of your protocol. In Reserve's case, this would be the trading of tokens. And you can do something to ensure that the trading mechanism is actually mildly resistant to price manipulation. So an example here would be something like a batch auction. I can start a batch auction today with a worst case price of 0. I can say, I'm willing to sell these assets for 0. And as long as people can't fill all the blocks with empty transactions during the duration of my batch auction, I should expect that people will show up and bid up the price of the assets in that auction to whatever the fair market price is, modulo gas fees they have to pay, arb costs, etc. So yeah, there's many different ways to use oracles, and given that they're a necessary evil in DeFi protocols, you can make it so that your protocols degrade gracefully in the case that they malfunction.
And I want to emphasize that from our experience as a whole in the ecosystem, every design choice has trade-off in terms of security. So for example, for a long time, for example, Compound decided that USDC price value was $1, no matter what happened. Then something happened, and then they decide to integrate Chainlink price feed. And that was not a bad design per se. It was a design choice that led in specific condition to loss. But otherwise, it's like an interesting design. Aave, we use Chainlink price feed that will integrate data from on-chain and off-chain, so CeFi and DeFi, and globally. Not only on the chain, we are publishing price feed that allows to be more resilient to local manipulation. So if the asset price on curve goes completely bonkers, that will not be reflected in the Aave price feed of that asset, because the outlier will be killed by the medianizer of Chainlink. That has an advantage, but what happened when Phantom, something happened on multi-chain, and then you have a bunch of assets that originate from Ethereum that are unbacked with a fair value of 0. Well, your Chainlink price feed will say, there's no problem, because it's a medianizer and doesn't really consider what happened on Phantom right now, doesn't consider multi-chain right now, but consider the whole ecosystem, and yeah, USDC is completely fine and worth $1. So we got lucky on this one because Phantom market was frozen a year ago, so it was impossible to manipulate on that. But we got the Harmony situation a bit earlier, and that led to some user loss. So that's a good design choice, but also have trade-offs. And I think every single situation will have some trade-offs, and it depends as a protocol what you optimize for. But I don't think there's a silver bullet out there.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting detail between, like, if you have something like an order book, which in a way is an auction, and you have an AMM, which in most of the redemption and issuance setups requires an oracle as an input for the center of the virtual order book. I think in case of a traditional order book, market participants, even in times of uncertainty, are able to come up with the fair price, while in an AMM setup, you need the input from somewhere. And I think this is the funny thing, and I always try to wrap my head around it, but I don't fully understand it. I have this feeling like our AMMs, they are not like completely able to be price makers. Somehow they are through arbitrage, but there's something to it which like makes them different from a traditional order book. Yeah, sorry, but yeah. What I wanted to talk about is like something about ZK proofs and the computation that you mentioned, and also like the evolution of oracles that would maybe bring more complexity. I mean, I'm not very familiar with these case setups, but I would love to understand how they could help to make computation, and like when you are thinking about these more complex setups, I guess computation would be more expensive, how they could help to make these computations cheaper, and also maybe like make oracles cheaper on expensive chains.
Yeah, so basically how we're doing this at HyperOracle is that you can create like a custom logic in something that we call a ZK graph. And a ZK graph is basically sort of the standard in which that then runs in our off-chain ZK VM. And that off-chain ZK VM actually runs in WASM. So basically that allows you to do a lot more different things than what you have currently in like traditional sort of ZK rollups, because they're all like ZK EVMs, so like Ethereum virtual machines. And so you're still constrained to solidity in that case, whereas like for us, if you run like, you can basically run any computation off-chain. So it's completely arbitrary what you want to do. And then the cool thing is, because it's a ZK VM, it creates a proof of that computation, and then it puts the result and the proof back on chain, and then you can instantly verify that this computation has actually been executed in the correct way. And I mean, that's going to definitely unlock like a lot of cool new use cases. We have some people who are building in stealth a stablecoin project using that with us. I can't really speak that much about it right now, unfortunately. But yeah, I think that's going to be really cool to see going forward what people are going to build on that.
Yeah, you know, to that vein, we built switchboard functions, which really expands the design space with what you can do with an Oracle, where you can request data, run it through a risk engine, you know, run computations off-chain, and then bring that result in a verifiable way on-chain. We don't think, you know, it makes sense to necessarily separate things. If you're already putting those trust components on the Oracle for price feeds, you know, you might as well add the flexibility and freedom to run more compute and do more complex activity and custom logic with that. With the design space being less about necessarily saving gas fees and more about, in a timely manner, right, bringing the data that they need on-chain for that particular use case.
Yeah, so I am extremely excited for this technology to come live. Here's one way you could make a almost completely decentralized stablecoin, or rather a decentralized flat coin, out of this kind of technology. So imagine that we're living in a world where you know, all the assets in the world have been tokenized. There are representations of them on chain. There are many different issuers from many different geographies for all these tokens, right? We have on chain the information about exactly what the world economy looks like, what percentage of different assets, basically how the value is distributed across all the different assets that are held by humans and smart contracts alike, right? That information is sort of intractable to be ingested by some stablecoin protocol unless we put it through this off-chain ZK transform, where you can basically say, look, I read out all the different market cap weightings at block X, and if you do this mathematical transform, you get back this distribution of assets in these particular percentages. So a stablecoin protocol could take this and have immutable code that automatically sets the backing for a flat coin, in this case, to this distribution of assets. So essentially what you have is we could all use a token to transact that is like a little slice of the global economy, right? And while this wouldn't be inflation resistant in the short term, you know, shocks like Russia or COVID would cause price increases, this would on a medium to long term be an inflation resistant coin, because you expect it to reflect the size of the global economy. It's a bit like everybody is transacting with the thing that all the extremely rich people in the world already use to represent their wealth, which is these, you know, complex portfolios that they pay people to manage. That is actually usually expressing some sort of agnosticism about the ideal approach and actually sort of using the market to tell them what that distribution should be. So, you know, we're very close to having the technology to do this ourselves on chain in a way that anyone can benefit.
If I may follow up on this zero knowledge approach to oracles, like personally I admire everyone working on that. You've got a gigabrain and a lot of knowledge, especially the level of math to get a grasp. And we've been playing with a few partners, like on creating storage proof, which will be an amazing technology to get rid of this trusted intermediary, especially as we source more and more data on chain. So as a goal, as a direction, I totally agree. That's how we should move forward. Fortunately, at the moment, I think it's still too expensive, and by I mean too expensive is just the proof generation is rather slow. So not for every use case we can get like say like a low latency data being delivered through in a proven way, and also cost-wise like the verification of a proof on chain. So correct me if I'm wrong, but to the best estimates it costs something like 200, 300,000 of gas in the most in the best use case. So if we can optimize, and I believe we will, then definitely I think more and more oracles will be using the data source to approve generation mechanisms on the on-chain activities.
Okay, I try to be a bit more, pay more attention to time than I did in my talk at Stable Summit. So we are at the end. Maybe a few quick closing thoughts before we open for questions. If you have, I mean, you don't have to, but if you have something on your mind, then now is the time.
So if I may start, I think that in the future Oracle will deliver, let's say, like a more complex data structure. So currently we deliver the price, the spot price, single price. We try to create like a holy grail of a methodology for this single price feed, but I think it'd be more like a multi-dimensional field. So not only provide like a spot price, but also like a price, like a fair market price of liquidation of a certain amount of assets. And that's something being constantly being asked for by the customers, lending protocols. And I think if you can add some color, like what's the liquidity profile of a given asset, or if we can add more data, what's the actual, let's say, certainty level, as with stable coins, of a price, whether we should stop certain functions in the system or whether we can unpause it, etc. So more data we can deliver to protocols that makes value for them. I think we as oracles, we strive to do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to pass over my turn here. I think we already said I came with a lot of good ideas, and I don't need to waste anyone else's time.
Yeah, then it's open for questions.